Obviously, with the way that technology is developing, AI has been a big part of conversations around the web, and AI has been a part of the conversations around WordPress. How are you seeing customers integrate AI into their WordPress implementations?
That is a good one. That's a good question. So,
hi, and welcome back to the WordPress Edge podcast, the ultimate destination for professionals looking to harness the power of WordPress for large-scale enterprise solutions. I am your host, Landon DePasquale, Strategic Clients Director at AmericanEagle.com. In this episode, we're going to the edge with enterprise CMSs. What do you need to think about when you're thinking about an enterprise CMS? I'm joined today, as always, by our guest, Ellis LaMay. Ellis is the WordPress Practice Director here at American Eagle. Ellis, thank you so much for joining me.
my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Ellis, for those who have not listened before, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right. So let's see, where do I begin? A little bit about myself. I've been involved in web development since I was a kid, learning HTML and basic coding. And it didn't become a serious part of my life and career until my, I think like mid to later 20s, after other ventures in life. Present day, I work at AmericanEagle.com and I work deeply within our sales pipeline. So what I've been able to do is utilize a lot of my design and development experience to work right alongside our executive sellers and our teams to scope and strategize project approaches for our clients. Is really how I think of it. And that runs the gamut from small, very specific feature implementations all the way up to like entire systems replatforming, where we're gutting out entire components of a tech stack and replacing them with, other systems and platforms. So it's a really exciting line of work because you get to learn so much about businesses, how they operate, what makes them tick, what kind of unique characteristics and features they need in their technical solutions. And I mean, honestly, I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm convinced that really no two businesses are the same, no matter how much they might even look like it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellis. So today we're going to chat a little bit about that kind of CMS editing experience. Obviously, WordPress, we feel, is a great opportunity for folks that are looking to get into that. Tell me a little bit about what you think the WordPress CMS kind of editing experience is like. What do you think works really well? How do people tend to leverage it?
Yeah, well, those are some good questions. So I'm a WordPress fan, obviously. But I think the topic of what is the editing experience like is kind of an interesting one because for one thing, there's different kinds of editing experiences within WordPress. For any of our listeners who are WordPress people themselves, they're probably thinking along the same lines of, in recent years, we've had Gutenberg debut itself and then continue to evolve. But you also have this whole sort of like cottage industry of page builders, Elementor, Divi Builder, everyone knows kind of the big names in that space. And depending on what your solution's built with, your editing experience is going to be quite different from one to the next. Now, on the topic of enterprise, we don't really see much Elementor and Divi and things like that at that kind of level. You're talking much more about custom implementations using the Gutenberg editor, where you essentially get the most out of its core capabilities, and then you build into it specifically what you need it to do and how you need it to work, ranging from the content blocks you use to their dynamic behavior to even workflow considerations, who can do what with what kinds of blocks.
Why do you think enterprises have moved more towards Gutenberg and moved away from the typical page builders that we've seen historically?
Well, honestly, for the same reasons that a lot of organizations would be smart to consider that move. And the reason being is just that Gutenberg is the native core piece of functionality within WordPress. So anyone who downloads WordPress is going to get Gutenberg right along with it. All those page builders, while they're very cool and neat utilities, they ultimately are third-party licensed products. You have to go buy them. And then you're beholden to their technology for pretty much the lifespan of your site, until you undergo a substantial redevelopment.
Yeah.
And, there's pros and cons to that all across the board. But I think, with Gutenberg, people can mold it to do exactly what they want. It's a core part of the infrastructure, so it's not going to go away. And it just has that sort of long-term factor to it that other licensed products don't have. I think something that every site owner experiences at some point is that some dependency that they rely on to run their digital operations evaporates and disappears. Maybe a product they use is going to get sunset. And so they get that dreaded notification that like, you're losing support for this product in 6 months, you got to re-platform. Nobody really likes to undergo that. I don't think there's a risk of that happening with Gutenberg because of its native tie into the platform. And that just gives people a little more optimism, I think, over the long haul and from an investment standpoint.
Yeah, I think there's also the beauty of the fact that Gutenberg has structured HTML at its core, so that even if it did go away or you decide you didn't want to use it anymore, your ability to get that content out of Gutenberg is much easier than it is with a lot of the proprietary page builders, which lock you into a specific serialization of that content that holds your info hostage.
That's exactly right. I mean, one of our senior most architects here at American Eagle actually, I thought put it quite eloquently once on a call where they basically stated that in a commercial page builder context, the value of what you create with the website is not in the code, but in fact in the database. Because when you're in a page builder scenario and you're building info boxes, changing colors, whatever you're doing, and you hit save, ultimately, or publish, I guess, ultimately, all those changes really trickle down to being stored in the database. And in a Gutenberg scenario, code matters much more. It's more portable. And that lends itself to further considerations like source control. Source control for page builder built sites is a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, that's true. So you've seen a wide variety of organizations leveraging WordPress as their CMS, right? I think we've seen the classic kind of publishing examples, but we've also seen some examples that are kind of off the typical, a little bit odd, maybe. Tell us a little bit about how different orgs are using WordPress as their CMS and what you think those high points are and what you think those difficulties are.
Sure. So I'll see enterprise organizations use WordPress frequently for building smaller microsites and like spin-off sites, things like foundations. Maybe they are starting new business units that are almost like startups within their broader organization. And because of that, they're approaching everything in just a kind of lean and fast way. And so they'll gravitate towards WordPress for implementations like that. But then I see some other interesting things like small microsites that are actually just seemingly behaving like display vehicles for bigger systems in the background. I won't name the client, I guess, right now, but I'm working with a client currently who wants to create a fundraising platform. And all of the data associated with the fundraisers they run, it's the type of thing where if you wanted to have a fundraiser at your kid's school, you would come to me as the organization and I would help facilitate that fundraiser, right? So they want to build a portal where you as like a parent could go and create an account, log in, write up a brief on the fundraiser you want to host at your kid's school, all of the information, all of the documentation that needs to go with it. And then I could work with you through this portal to get it going, right? So that's kind of the premise. What makes it interesting is that all of the backend data that moves around between the business and the user is all managed and stored in Salesforce. While building the front end experience that they would like to roll out to their users in a Salesforce only context is quite the heavy lift. A lot of level of effort. And because they're still somewhat trial and erroring this, they don't want to commit to something quite so heavy. And so we're using WordPress to essentially build what, in terms of size, you might call a microsite because it's only a handful of pages, but these are highly dynamic pages that are displaying data coming through real-time calls to Salesforce. So it's not insignificant in that regard. And so I would say that implementations like that are something that I'm seeing more and more and more of over time, where essentially enterprise organizations are using WordPress to kind of stitch together parts of their tech stack.
And I think that's been an experience both of us have seen where WordPress becomes kind of the core content hub for that, but it's touching 3, 4, 5, 6 other platforms that have data or other pieces of information coming in and out. And why do you think WordPress is so popular for filling that niche right in the middle there?
I think it's partly to do with, oh gosh, I mean, that's a good question. I think, I think that has to do mostly with the ability to manage taxonomies and content types within WordPress as well as you can. I will say, I mean, my proficiency lies far and away with WordPress versus other platforms. But in my line of work, I do get to interact with other platforms. I'll get to log into them and kind of play around the back end. And I'm always in those scenarios, I'm always kind of in this mindset of trying to take in what I'm observing in this new platform. Like, for example, the other day I was messing around in the back end of Craft CMS.
Okay.
Right. And so I try to draw parallels between how are things structured, how is content structured and organized and managed in the back end of whatever CMS I'm looking at, and how does that kind of map over to WordPress in the closest way that it can. And some platforms map over somewhat seamlessly, I guess, air quotes, right? Like Drupal to WordPress. You're not exactly reinventing the wheel there, but other platforms that handle content architecture much differently, it can be quite the radical change. And I think that people just take an easier learning curve to WordPress between custom post types, taxonomies, and custom fields. That kind of gives you all of the mechanical levers you would need to pull and use to manage really, really large data sets and organize them in any way you really want.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest part of it. And it's just relatable for people.
Yeah, I think you have this interesting mix of good content editing experience plus power of relating different types of content together.
Mm-hmm.
And when those two things come together, it seems like you have this almost ideal circumstance where WordPress is great for those content experiences,
right,
without needing to be super opinionated about business logic or data structures in third-party systems and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you see people using WordPress in these different ways, are there any new trends that you're seeing? Things where you say, hey, CMS technology is kind of headed in this direction and we think people should be aware of where that's going?
I do think that in the next couple of years, well, it's already happened, but I think it's just going to continue down this road. As I think headless is going to continue to become more and more and more of a approach for projects and how companies approach their implementations. And I think that's largely because in the conversations I have with the clients I can think of, there continues to be this separation, or I guess like a bigger separation between the technical staff who manage the system and the, marketing folk essentially who drive the creatives of what we all access when we go to their websites. And I think that divide's kind of becoming a little bit bigger and bigger. And so I think headless is more conducive to those kinds of organizations.
Yeah. And I think we've seen WordPress work really well in those headless circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
As you think about coming back to WordPress as kind of a central platform with these different channels, are there particular ways of doing that kind of omni-channel content delivery that you've seen work really well with enterprises?
Yeah, but I'm honestly not the guy to champion the approaches down to the last detail. What I mean is like GraphQL is an API technology or a form of API technology that makes retrieving information much faster than through like a REST API.
Yep.
So I can tell you with certain organizations that have certain types of data sets, given sizes, and the way that they need to retrieve that data and then disperse it to other front end sources, GraphQL is a major leg up.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I can't tell you how to implement GraphQL. Right. So
I think one of the things I've seen with enterprises is the ability for them to take something in WordPress and deliver it to a mobile app and social media and a third-party website, kind of all in the same experience. And that omni-channel experience has allowed them to really dig in and grow that content's reach from a single source out to those other spots.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about what you've seen around efficiency in CMSs. How does WordPress help some of these bigger organizations streamline their workflow and make them more efficient?
I think the examples of that kind of stuff are all going to be like pretty hyper specific to like certain use cases, because really to like generalize it, you're talking about, again, you kind of go back to like the root architecture of WordPress, the ability to create blocks that you sort of manage on a block level, but you can incorporate into a page or a template.
Yep.
You also have that ability to then you have that whole template hierarchy with, archives, post types, so on. being able to control those components, I mean, really a person can, or an organization can take WordPress out of the box and then mold it like clay into how they need it to behave while still playing within the rules of core WordPress and best practice.
Yeah.
And so the fact that somebody can take something like a CMS that really almost like behaves like a raw material, and then they can refine it into the fine-tuned system they need it to be, like that's the efficiency. What that looks like in actual implementation is going to vary from organization to organization. But
obviously, with the way that technology is developing, AI has been a big part of conversations around the web, and AI has been a part of the conversations around WordPress. How are you seeing customers integrate AI into their WordPress implementations?
That is a good one. That's a good question. So let's see. I'm seeing it. I feel like there's two sides to this answer, because I see people trying to do things that are, in my opinion, very sophisticated and almost kind of far reaching in terms of the outcome they hope to get out of it. And then on the flip side, or on the other side, I'm seeing people use AI in some of the most like simplistic little ways in their day, but that cumulatively add up to make a big difference.
Yeah.
And so I guess let's go back to the first one, these sort of far reaching things. Like there's new products that come out almost on a daily basis that involve AI. And we all know that there's a large ecosystem of commercial WordPress products out there. A lot of them have AI in them, page builders where you can type in a prompt and it'll kind of create some sections and like basically build you a page. The reason I say it's far reaching is because it's just getting you a small head start. No prompt you type into those tools right now really furnishes something that is like totally polished and on brand, at least not that I've seen. And so, I think people go into tools like that thinking, oh, this is just going to like do the job for me, the end, when really they're meant to just be like starters and helpers. And you still need that human in the loop, as they say, to finalize the outcome. Right. And then on the like really, really simple day-to-day stuff, I'll give you an example of what I see some people sometimes on my team, but on the client side also doing that I think is brilliant is if you think about building a content page on a website, let's say that you have a section of informational boxes and a nice looking grid. Anybody who's managed a CMS before and had to create content knows the pains of having little paragraphs that are all different lengths.
Yeah.
And they don't ultimately fit into a grid very well. And so you as the content creator, you've built this page and it looks all cattywampus because, right. And so what I'm seeing people do is take like their raw, organic, I guess like original content in its varying lengths. And then they'll go and work with like ChatGPT or a tool or like Anthropic, where they give it a prompt like, hey, I'm creating some info boxes on a web page section. Here's a screenshot of what I'm creating. I need all of these descriptions to be exactly 127 characters in length.
Yeah.
Right. And that way they can do their content creation job. They can worry about the order of the flow of information on the page. They can make it look nice and refined, but they don't have to sit there on a day when, they're just not feeling it and jump through mental loops to try to like perfect the language and make it the right amount.
Yeah.
Like, so that kind of thing to me really fits the mold of how people try to approach AI with this perspective of like, I'm not going to use AI to like do the creating for me. I'm just going to use it to give me an edge while I create.
Yeah.
I guess that's how I think of it.
It's a tool to make things easier and quicker as opposed to replacing the work that you're actually doing.
Yeah. So little things like that I think are really, really neat. I've seen some other things that I think are noteworthy. Like I've seen some some AI tools that allow people to take already existing websites and pull them into Figma as concepts. So they can then tinker with them, change them, and in like a prototyping and like kind of ideation scenario, like that sort of thing is massively useful.
Awesome.
So
Ellis, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you joining us. Was there anything else you wanted to hit or any kind of last minute plugs you wanted to make while you're here?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ellis. Appreciate you joining us. As always, thanks again for joining us at The Edge. I'm your host, Landon DePasquale. And until the next episode, feed your WordPress obsession. For more information about today's episodes and the topics we discussed today, check out our dedicated WordPress Edge landing page at AmericanEagle.com Studios.